The story of Bobi Wine begins on February 12, 1982, in Kozi, Uganda, where he was born into a world that was already shaped by struggle. But it was in Kamwokya, one of the poorest and most crowded neighborhoods in Kampala, where his identity would be formed. Kamwokya was not just a place, it was a teacher of survival, of endurance, of a thin line between hope and despair. The streets of Kamwokya were full of movement and noise. Children played barefoot on dusty paths, families gathered around charcoal stoves with small portions of food, and music could always be heard somewhere. But beneath the energy of daily life lay the constant reality of poverty. Most people worked hard but earned just enough to stay alive. In this environment, Robert Kyagulanyi grew up seeing what society often tries to hide. He saw children his age taken out of school because their parents could not afford fees. He saw young men chased by the police for simply loitering where they had no other place to go. He saw mothers struggle to provide, fathers work endlessly without reward, and families pushed to the edges of desperation. These were not just observations. They were lessons that would shape how he viewed the world. Yet, in the midst of hardship, his parents believed in education. They believed that knowledge could unlock the doors that poverty tried to keep shut. And so, Robert attended school. He went to Mwerwi Primary School, then later to Kitanti Hill School, and finally Kololo Secondary School. Each day, he traveled between two different Ugandas. At home in Kamwokya, he lived among the poor, the forgotten majority. At school, he learned alongside children from wealthier neighborhoods, children who arrived in cars and went home to lives of comfort. This contrast opened his eyes early. He began to understand something many do not see until adulthood, that poverty is not caused by laziness or fate, but by systems that favor some and neglect others. He understood that dignity is not given equally to all. As a child, he wasn't the loudest, but he was reflective. He listened, he observed, and somewhere inside him, a quiet resistance began to form. Not the kind that shouts first, but the kind that thinks, that questions, that remembers. He found comfort in music, not music for entertainment alone, but music that told stories, music that explained the life around him, pain, survival, unity, love, and humor. In Kamwokya, music was a mirror, and Robert discovered he could use that mirror to reflect truth. Over time, music became his language, the one place he could speak freely, the one place he could turn the struggles of his community into something beautiful, something powerful. When he finished secondary school, he made a decision many did not expect. He enrolled at Makerere University to study music, dance, and drama. It was here that the voice he carried inside him began to sharpen, not just into talent, but into purpose. And as he stood in classrooms, rehearsal halls, and recording spaces, surrounded by instruments, ideas, and creativity, the boy from Kamwokya slowly began transforming into the man the world would soon come to know. A voice was forming, a leader was emerging, and his name was about to become Bobi Wine. When Robert Kyagulanyi stepped into Makerere University, he did not enter as a star. He entered as a young man searching for the right instrument to express what life had taught him. Music had always lived inside him, but now it began to take shape to find direction. He practiced, he listened, he watched, and he learned how music could be used not only to entertain, but to educate and awaken. After university, he moved toward the music industry, and it did not take long for him to choose the identity that would later carry the weight of a national movement. The name was simple but powerful: Bobi Wine. Bobi Wine did not sing the polished songs of the elite. His music came from Kamwokya, from the dusty roads and crowded homes, from the laughter of hustlers and the tears of struggle. His voice carried the pulse of the streets, and the streets understood him. His songs spoke of a system that forgot the poor, the dreams of ordinary people, the frustration of being unheard, and the unbreakable spirit of the ghetto. Tracks like Akagoma, Funchala Ghetto, and later Time Bomb and Kikamando became more than just hits, they became messages. They played in taxis, on street corners, in markets, in homes, and in nightclubs. and wherever they played, the people nodded because they recognized themselves in the words. Bobi Wine was not a musician trying to escape his roots. He was a musician amplifying them. He built his own recording studio in Kamwokya, not in the upscale neighborhoods where most celebrities moved after success. His home remained in the heart of the ghetto. People didn't need to search for him. He was among them, living the same life, breathing the same air, facing the same struggles. And because of this, the people didn't just like him, they trusted him. They began calling him the Ghetto President, not as a title for show, but as a recognition of leadership earned, not given. His music carried messages the political leaders did not want to hear, but the people needed to hear them. Through beats and melodies, Bobi Wine exposed corruption, greed, police brutality, inequality, land grabbing, and the slow suffocation of freedom. He understood something deeply. Art can be a weapon, and his microphone became exactly that, a weapon of truth. Not violent, not hateful, but powerful enough to shake the quietness of a population that had been taught to fear speaking out. As years passed, his influence grew beyond music. He began organizing community projects, cleaning campaigns, youth empowerment programs, medical support drives. He was showing that leadership was not about speeches, it was about service. By this time, Uganda was under the long rule of President Yoweri Museveni, who had been in power since 1986. Many young people in Uganda felt forgotten, with little hope for economic opportunity or political participation. Bobi Wine's voice resonated with them deeply. He wasn't just entertaining anymore. He was awakening. Music had taken him far, but change required a new stage. A stage where laws were made, a stage where decisions that shape lives were taken. And so, the man who had once only held a microphone made a decision that would change his life and the political landscape of Uganda forever. He would enter politics. By the mid-2010s, Bobi Wine had become more than just a musician. He was a voice that millions listened to, especially the young, the poor, and the silenced. But he began to realize that while music could inspire people, it could not change the laws that shaped their lives. The real decisions that affected ordinary Ugandans were being made in parliament, often by people far removed from the struggles of the common citizen. So, in 2017, Bobi Wine made a decision that surprised some and inspired many. He announced that he would run for Member of Parliament for Kayadondo East. Many treated it as a publicity stunt. They said musicians belonged on stage, not in Parliament. But the people who understood him, the people who had grown with him, who had listened and believed in his words, they knew he was serious. The campaign was unlike any Uganda had seen in years. There were no expensive convoys, no grand hotels, no polished speeches written by strategists. Instead, Bobi Wine walked through markets, shook hands with boda-boda riders, sat with mothers in local stalls, and listened to the frustrations of the youth. He did not promise miracles, he promised representation, a voice that understood where the people came from. When Election Day arrived, the results were overwhelming. Bobi Wine won by a landslide. The victory was not just political, it was symbolic. A message echoed across Uganda. The ghetto had found its voice in Parliament. Entering Parliament, Bobi Wine stayed true to his identity. While many politicians changed their tone once elected, he spoke the same way he had spoken in his music, directly, truthfully, fearlessly. He challenged policies that harmed the poor. He questioned government spending. He highlighted corruption. And he defended the right of the people to have a say in their own future. The moment that brought him national political prominence was the debate surrounding the removal of the presidential age limit. This law, if changed, would allow President Yoweri Museveni, already in power for more than 3 decades, to run indefinitely. Many politicians supported the amendment silently, afraid to oppose a system that rewarded loyalty and punished dissent. But Bobi Wine did not remain silent. He spoke openly and powerfully against it. He said that the country did not belong to one man, but to its citizens. He said leadership must rotate, and the youth must have the chance to envision and shape the future of Uganda. His speeches went viral. His message spread far beyond parliamentary walls. The government began to see him not just as a musician, not just as a young politician, but as a threat. Soon, he faced the consequences. Concerts were suddenly blocked. Venues canceled shows. Radio stations were warned not to play his music. Police began to follow his movements. Government spokespersons dismissed him, mocked him, attempted to belittle him. But the more they tried to silence him, the more his influence grew. Because by now, Bobi Wine was no longer speaking for the people. He was speaking with them. The energy around him was no longer entertainment. It was a movement that had been silent for too long, a movement that was waking up, a movement that was about to challenge power at its highest seat. The stage was set, and Uganda was about to witness one of the most defining political confrontations of its modern history. As Bobi Wine continued to grow as a public figure and a voice of the common people, the political situation in Uganda was changing. President Yoweri Museveni, who had been in power since 1986, had become a long-standing ruler. Many young Ugandans, especially those in the slums and struggling communities, felt left behind. Jobs were scarce, the cost of living was rising, and corruption within powerful offices continued to be reported. The youth, who made up most of the population, felt like their future was being controlled without their voice. Bobi Wine saw this frustration every day. In the music he performed across the country, crowds would shout back lyrics that questioned the system. People began to see him not just as an entertainer, but as a leader, someone who understood their lives because he lived them. They looked at him and saw hope. In 2017, something happened that would shift his life permanently. The parliamentary seat for Kayodondo East became vacant. Many expected that a wealthy or politically connected candidate would take the seat. But Bobi Wine stepped forward. He didn't come with big sponsors. He didn't come with political backing. He came with the people. He campaigned on motorcycles, walked through villages, visited markets, and listened to ordinary citizens. He told them that parliament should not only be for those born into power, but for every Ugandan who believed in change. His campaign slogan became, "People power, our power." A simple phrase, but strong. It reminded Ugandans that leadership comes from the people, not the government, not the wealthy, not the elite. The response was overwhelming. When election day came, Bobi Wine won by a landslide. His victory sent a shock across the nation. A popular musician had entered parliament and defeated the established political class. Youth in every corner of the country began wearing red berets and chanting, "People power." It was not just a movement anymore. It was a message that echoed in the slums of Kampala, the fields of Gulu, the markets of Mbale, and the fishing communities of Lake Victoria. Bobi Wine had become a symbol of resistance, of hope, and of a new generation rising. But with this rise came resistance. The government did not take his popularity lightly. His rallies were closely watched, his speeches were criticized, his movements were monitored, and yet his voice only grew stronger. Every time he stood in parliament, he spoke not with political language, but with the voice of the streets, a voice that demanded better schools, fair governance, and dignity for every Ugandan. Bobi Wine was no longer just Robert Kyagulanyi, the musician. He was now Honorable Robert Kyagulanyi Sentamu, Member of Parliament, and the face of a political awakening that was beginning to reshape Uganda's future. Bobi Wine's rise in politics was not welcomed by the ruling establishment. His message, that power belonged to the people, challenged a system that had existed for decades. The government saw his influence growing, especially among the youth. And where there is influence, there is threat. What followed would become one of the most difficult and defining chapters of Bobi Wine's life. In 2018, during the Arua municipality by-election, Bobi Wine traveled to support an opposition candidate. The atmosphere was intense. Crowds gathered, chanting "People power" and waving red ribbons in the air. It was clear that Bobi Wine's presence was energizing a movement that was spreading far beyond music and Kampala. But on the final campaign day, chaos erupted. It was reported that stones were thrown at the presidential convoy as it passed through the area, a serious accusation. Shortly after, security forces launched a crackdown. Gunshots rang out. People ran for safety, and Bobi Wine, along with other MPs and supporters, was arrested. What happened next shocked the entire world. Bobi Wine appeared in court days later, battered, weakened, unable to stand without support. His face and body showed signs of severe physical assault. Images and videos circulated across social media. News stations around the world aired his story. Suddenly, Bobi Wine's fight was no longer just a Ugandan issue, it had become international. He was charged with treason, a crime that carries heavy punishment. But even while in detention, his voice continued to rise. Ugandans filled the streets, demanding his release. Artists, politicians, human rights groups, and activists from across Africa, Europe, and America spoke out. The government had attempted to silence him, but instead they amplified him. After intense pressure, Bobi Wine was granted permission to travel abroad for medical treatment. He left Uganda physically injured, but mentally sharper than ever. During his time overseas, he addressed global audiences, spoke to international media, and met leaders and activists. He explained what was happening in Uganda, the arrests, the beatings, the suppression of free speech. He was no longer just a local politician. He had become a global symbol for democracy in Africa. When he returned to Uganda, thousands welcomed him. The government tried to restrict gatherings, but it did not matter. A spirit had already been awakened. However, this chapter did not end in peace. Security forces continued to disrupt his rallies. His concerts were banned. His supporters were arrested. Some lost their lives. Tear gas and gunfire became a familiar scene wherever he tried to speak. Yet, even under pressure, Bobi Wine remained determined. The more the state pushed him down, the more people believed that he was fighting for them. He spoke directly to the youth, the boda riders, students, ghetto residents, young mothers, market vendors, those who felt invisible. He told them that the future was theirs. By 2019, the People Power movement had grown into a force that could no longer be dismissed as mere youthful excitement. Red berets, once just a symbol, had become a uniform of defiance. Kampala streets, university hostels, village centers, and taxi parks echoed with chants of Fif Tulio. "We are here." Bobi Wine announced that he would run for president in the 2021 elections. It was a historic moment. A young man from Kamwokya, the ghetto, standing against President Yoweri Museveni, who had ruled Uganda for more than 3 decades. Almost immediately, the atmosphere in the country shifted. Rallies were blocked. Members of his campaign team were arrested. Entire roads were shut down whenever he tried to travel. Police and military trucks lined up in the streets, and yet people still ran toward him wherever he appeared. Children climbed on rooftops just to catch a glimpse. Women ululated as he passed. Young men raised their hands in the air, flashing the People Power symbol. But the road was dark and heavy. In November 2020, while Bobi Wine was campaigning in Luka district, he was arrested, accused of violating COVID-19 guidelines. As news of his arrest spread, protests broke out across the country. The response from security forces was brutal. Live bullets were fired. Tear gas filled the streets. In just a few hours, more than 50 people were killed. Families mourned sons and daughters who would never come home. Bobi Wine was eventually released, but the message was clear. The struggle would not be easy. As Election Day approached, the state intensified efforts to silence him. His house was surrounded. His campaign team faced kidnappings and torture. Journalists covering his rallies were beaten. Internet services were slowed, and eventually the country went into a total internet shutdown just days before voting. Still, Bobi Wine refused to give up. On January 14, 2021, Uganda voted. Lines formed early. Some walked miles. Others whispered their support quietly, afraid of the consequences. The atmosphere carried both hope and fear. Hope for change, fear of what might follow. When the Electoral Commission announced Museveni as the winner, securing another term, Bobi Wine rejected the results. He claimed massive vote rigging and irregularities. Security forces sealed off his home, placing him under house arrest. For days, he could not leave. Even visitors bringing food were turned away. Soldiers patrolled outside his gate, rifles in hand. International observers raised concerns. Human rights organizations demanded answers. But inside Uganda, fear tightened its grip. The country had witnessed an election that felt less like democracy and more like a struggle for survival. Yet, even in defeat, Bobi Wine's message remained unbroken. He stood before cameras and said, "We are removing a dictator. We are not backing down. Our struggle is nonviolent, and it is for every Ugandan who wants freedom." He had lost the election, but he had won something else. A generation. He had awakened millions of young Ugandans who realized, perhaps for the first time, that leadership did not have to come from the same faces, the same families, or the same power circles. It could come from the ghetto. After the 2021 elections, Bobi Wine's life became even more intense. Though he had formally lost the presidency, his role as the leader of the People Power movement had only grown. He remained under constant surveillance, his movements tracked by security forces and his rallies monitored. The red berets that once signified hope now marked him and his supporters as targets. His home became a fortress. Soldiers and police stood outside, ready to block any attempt at organizing a gathering. Every step he took in public required careful planning. Yet, Bobi Wine refused to let fear dictate his actions. He continued to address the nation, speak to supporters, and advocate for human rights, social justice, and democratic reforms. His activism attracted international attention. News outlets like CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera covered his struggle. Human rights organizations condemned the violence against his supporters. Global leaders acknowledged the courage of a man who stood up against one of Africa's longest-serving presidents. The world now saw Bobi Wine not just as a politician or musician, but as a symbol of resistance and a voice for the oppressed. Despite the threats, arrests, and intimidation, he worked tirelessly to expand his party, the National Unity Platform, NUP. He mobilized youth, educated them on civic rights, and encouraged participation in local and national elections. Bobi Wine continued to leverage social media and music to communicate, using them as powerful tools to spread his message even when traditional channels were blocked. He faced personal risk every day. Many of his supporters were arrested, beaten, or even killed. Yet he persisted, insisting that the struggle was bigger than one man. His vision remained clear: a Uganda where leadership is accountable, where youth have opportunities, and where the voices of ordinary citizens are heard. Through it all, Bobi Wine maintained his connection to Kamwokya, the neighborhood that had shaped him. He returned there often, visiting families, helping the community, and reminding the people that the fight for dignity and equality was not abstract. It was personal, and it belonged to all of them. Today, Bobi Wine's story continues. He remains a living symbol of courage, inspiring not just Uganda, but Africa and the world to stand up for justice, democracy, and the power of the people. His journey from the dusty streets of Kamwokya to global recognition is far from over, and millions continue to watch, hoping and believing that change is possible. Despite the obstacles, the arrests, and the violence, Bobi Wine refused to be silenced. Every challenge became fuel for his determination. He continued to travel across Uganda, meeting communities, encouraging the youth, and reminding the people that their voices mattered. The Red Beret movement, once a symbol of resistance, had grown into a nationwide call for accountability, justice, and freedom. Globally, he became a symbol of courage and resilience. Leaders, journalists, and activists recognized that his struggle was not just political, it was a fight for human dignity and democratic values. Bobi Wine used this international attention to shine a light on the realities faced by ordinary Ugandans, making sure the world could not look away. Yet despite fame and recognition, he remained deeply connected to his roots. Kamwokya, the slums that shaped him, remained his home, his anchor, and the heart of his mission. He continued to speak for the forgotten, to inspire those who had been silenced, and to push for a Uganda where leadership belongs to the people, not a single ruler. Bobi Wine's story is far from finished. Every rally, every song, every speech is a continuation of a struggle that began in the dusty streets of Kampala. His journey reminds the world that courage can arise from even the most unlikely places, that a voice from the ghetto can challenge power, and that hope can never be silenced. And as long as the fight for justice, freedom, and dignity continues, Bobi Wine will remain not just a man, but a movement, a symbol of resilience, of courage, and of the unyielding belief that change is possible. Bobi Wine's story is not just the story of a man, but the story of a people awakening. From the dusty streets of Kamwokya to the global stage, he has shown that courage is louder than fear, and hope is stronger than oppression. His voice, once a song echoing through the ghetto, has become a roar that demands change, accountability, and justice. And though the road ahead remains uncertain, one truth is clear. As long as the people rise, as long as voices are not silenced, the movement he carries will continue to grow, inspiring generations to believe that no barrier, no system, no ruler, no fear can extinguish the power of the human spirit. From the streets of Kamwokya to the world stage, Bobi Wine proves that courage can never be silenced. If you want more stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.